Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for January 25th, 2021. As we've been reporting over the last days, we're moving into a very dangerous moment, the ground between two different paradigms, where there's a phase shift underway. This didn't start with the inauguration of Joe Biden, but we can see a definite trend in what's happening with just the first few days of his administration, with his cancellation of a number of acts of President Trump, putting the United States back in the Paris Climate Accord, a number of steps. And we'll get to a few of these when we take up the leading developments. But the important point to realize is that the coup that was successful in removing Donald Trump, which took 4 years of developments, 4 years of lies and slanders, has created the conditions where the global oligarchy feel that they've won the fight and they can now go ahead with the next phase in the controlled disintegration of the world economy, by which they mean reducing the number of people on the planet because, according to one of the gurus of the climate change movement and the Davos World Economic Forum, Prince Charles, with his Terra Carta, it's human beings that are the problem on the planet. And the idea that we consume too much, that we have too much energy, we have too much food, too much modern agriculture. What happens if you attack that, if you destroy it? Well, you destroy human life. You kill off human beings. And that's the intent of the Davos billionaires who will be meeting over the next 4 days, starting today, under the direction of Prince Charles and Klaus Schwab. So the idea that they're going to improve or push for global governance in the form of a financial regime change. And what do they mean by a financial regime change? They mean central banks controlling not just credit and monetary policy, but spending. That is, handing the reins of power over governments to banks that operate not on the sovereign interests of the people of a nation, but the profit that can be made through speculation by private banks. And when they run into problems, what do? They get bailouts. So that's going to be the main topic that's going to come up with the Davos billionaires meeting over the next 4 days. It's the push for a zero carbon mandate, a Green New Deal. We can stop it. And it's not going to succeed in reviving the economy. But that's why we can stop it. We've got to make sure people understand exactly what it is. Now, at the same time, today the articles of impeachment, or one article of impeachment of President Trump will be presented to the Senate. This is for a trial that's going to begin on February 8th. It's an absurdity. He's no longer in office. Obviously, what they're trying to do is smear and slander him further, even as they're censoring him, censoring his supporters, and labeling his supporters as racists, Nazis, and terrorists. And then at the same time, Joe Biden calls for unity. So it shouldn't happen. It's part of the overkill, but all it's going to do is create the context where there can be violence from some of the more desperate Trump supporters who will be propelled into violent action, including through provocateurs in their ranks, which will then justify further crackdowns, further censorship, and so on. So those are the two leading developments, the Davos Forum and the impeachment. Now, I should note for you that General Lloyd Austin, after having been confirmed as Defense Secretary, immediately made 2 calls to Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, to assert U.S. continuing support and cooperation with NATO, which was questionable under President Trump. And his second call was to the British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace to congratulate the British government on the largest increase in defense spending in 30 years. Now here's an irony. The economy of Great Britain is in a shambles. The COVID crisis is spreading like crazy. The military has, they're springing leaks in their ships. They don't have enough spare parts for their planes to fly. So now they're greatly increasing the spending on defense as part of the NATO eastern expansion, an eastern expansion not only against the Russian border, but now into the so-called Indo-Pacific region, with British carrier group heading toward that area as part of the containment against China. At the same time this is happening, there are reports that of U.S. troop movements from Iraq into Syria. Now, isn't it interesting, the day after President Biden is inaugurated, that he's sending troops into Syria. One of the last things President Trump was doing was removing troops from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Biden, as we know, supported the Iraq War, supported an escalation for regime change against the Assad government in Syria. So is he now planning to carry out the Hillary Clinton plan to bring down Assad? So this is another ominous development. We'll have to take a look at that. And at the same time, of course, there are growing tensions in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Those people who are saying Biden is controlled by China don't understand that even if it's true that Biden's getting money from various Chinese investments that his son did, his policy under Obama was confrontation, was geopolitics, was war. He's a war hawk and a neoliberal. And until there's something significant that changes that, the idea that he's going to turn the United States over to China is a fraud. We're on the course toward regime change. Now that regime change appears to have taken place in the United States, they're escalating for regime change in China and Russia. And who's they? The British Empire, which includes the so-called deep state networks in the United States. You see it with the Navalny case in Russia, where they're hyping up the protests against his arrest. Well, this is happening globally. There are protests everywhere because we're having a systemic collapse. The world economic system is collapsing, although in some places less than in others. And among the places where it's collapsing less are Russia and China. But who's funding the regime change in those countries? The same networks that funded the anti-Trump movement in the United States, including people like Soros, including the neocon think tanks like the Lincoln Project in the United States, the National Endowment for Democracy, and so on. There used to be a joke that why are there no military coups in the United States? Because there's no U.S. embassy there. We don't need a U.S. embassy to run a coup in the United States when you control key networks in the State Department, the Justice Department, the intelligence community, and so on. So this is going to be a very tumultuous period ahead. Now, what we are urging people to do is to look at the proposal from Lyndon LaRouche from the early part of this new century for an alliance of the United States, Russia, China, and India, the four-power agreement. You can find it on the Executive Intelligence Review website. Just type in four powers and you'll get an explanation of it. We need the power of sovereign nation states to stand up against this globalized system of looting and killing, which is what the Great Reset would be. So go to our website. You'll be able to find the material to back it up, as well as his 4 laws, which show the way that we can not just revive our economy, but we have to revive it by destroying the existing looting system of the central banks and the bailout system of the private commercial banks that are loaded up with unbelievable levels of unsustainable debt. So that's my update for this morning. It's going to be a very difficult week in terms of keeping on top of things. There's a lot happening, a lot of bad things, but the basic point is we can still win this fight because they are not going to succeed with the Great Reset. And the American people the Russian people, the Chinese people will not accept this new dictatorship, or what Helga Zepp LaRouche has described as the new fascism. So mobilize, think, and spread the word. And I'll be back with you tomorrow.